What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about a comic called Minor Threat, #1 by Patton Oswalt, Jordan Blum, and Scott Hepburn. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the new comic book character, Playtime, as well as the world she lives in, where superheroes and supervillains have an unusual arrangement between themselves that the general public doesn't know about, why that arrangement has just been dissolved, as well as talk about Playtime's unusual situation and why she's probably one of the best new comic book characters I've seen in a long time.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
So, I'm gonna be brutally honest, when I saw this comic at first, I really didn't think much of it because, and if you are a channel member or patron, you probably seen me talk about this. During that video, I talked about how, there's tons of celebrity comics out there. There's celebrities out there all the time writing their own comics. We've seen musicians like Gerard Way, who gave us Umbrella Academy, which is a pretty good comic. We also know that Rashida Jones, back in, 2009, she came out with a comic called The Frenemy of the State. We also have seen various and sundry comics by actors like Kevin Smith. Earlier this year, John Leguizamo came out with their own comic called Phenom X, and we also know that Wesley Snipes has a comic of his own coming out very soon. But this one I thought was really interesting because this one is a comic by Patton Oswalt, who technically has written several comics before and even created some comics before, but this one was just very interesting to me because Patton Oswalt's kind of a geek's geek. He is a nerd's nerd. He is a guy who is really into comics. He's mostly known for his acting in comedy, but beyond that, he's also a very outspoken comics fan. Probably more so than just about any other celebrity other than Kevin Smith. So Patton Oswalt, as well as Jordan Blum, who is mostly known for writing things like episodes of Community, American Dad, as well as the Marvel MODOK series that was on Hulu, and they've teamed up to create this awesome world where superheroes and supervillains have this unspoken arrangement between them. The villains, they go out, they commit petty crimes or big crime. They basically participate in all manner of supervillain activity that you would associate with a comic book supervillain. It's all a part of what they consider the great game for them, and the superheroes stop them. They beat them up, throw them in jail, the supervillains get out, they wash, rinse, repeat. It's a good setup, but the rest of the world doesn't really know about this. And another thing to mention here too is that this is also a world that has been invaded by aliens. They've had multiversal incursions, all the typical stuff that you would associate with like Marvel Comics or DC. All that sort of stuff has happened in this world. This world has seen threats like Galactus, Thanos, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Crisis on Infinite Earths. They've seen everything. And in the middle of all this is a character by the name of Frankie, a former supervillain who used to go by the name Playtime. She was a sidekick to her mother, the Toy Queen, and they were a supervillain duo who got into it with all manner of cops and super criminals, but they were mostly seen as small time. And when Frankie was this supervillain sidekick, she was still a kid. She was still growing up. She never had the childhood that other normal people had, even other supervillains for that matter. She's been in the game since as long as she can remember, and she also has this unique ability to create things. And she even says herself throughout the course of this comic that a lot of it's stuff that she just does subconsciously. She doesn't really know exactly what she's doing. She just knows that if she picks up anything, any junk, any random and sundry items, she can turn these things into highly sophisticated, highly advanced forms of technology. We see her operating with shoes that have springs built into them. She has teddy bears that seem to have a life of their own, and all kinds of other toys that just seem to function in a way that defies belief. Like, if there was anyone to compare Playtime to, the closest equivalent would be a character like maybe the Toy Man from DC Comics. But right now, she doesn't want to be a supervillain. She just wants to be a normal, regular, everyday person. She's trying to get her life on track. But unfortunately, because of her criminal past, the fact that she's also a superhuman or a meta, she can't get a job. She can't find a place to live. No one wants to rent a home to her. She's basically struggling here, and she's fresh out of prison, and she's just trying to get her life back, trying to get her family back, and it's all working against her. But earlier I said that there was some kind of an agreement between the supervillains and the superheroes, and that's kind of what I want to get back to here. Right now, Frankie operates a bar that would, if you're familiar with the Marvel Comics universe, it would probably remind you of the Bar with No Name. It's basically a place where all types of shady superhumans and supervillains hang out. It's the same thing in Marvel Comics as it is here, only in this case it's not called the Bar with No Name. And in comes two supervillains, one of which who has almost been killed by a superhero by the name of the Insomniac, who is considered to be one of the premier superheroes in this universe, who is a part of what you could consider a Justice League or Avengers type group called the Continuum. They bring this broken supervillain into the bar where Frankie works, and this is how she gets dragged into everything. She's trying to keep a low profile, she's trying to stay out of this, but then everything just keeps bearing down on her even more when another superhero by the name of the Searcher gives out a wide message to everyone in the city that they're looking for the supervillain who killed Kid Dusk, a sidekick to what is the Batman of this universe. And if you're wondering, Kid Dusk looks oddly like Robin. We even see at a later point where this Batman-like entity has apparently encountered Frankie in the past, and we even get some kind of inclination that Batman-esque character is who probably put Frankie on the right path to getting away from a life of crime. They could tell that there was something different about Frankie, that she had gone through some life changes, and I'll save that for you to read in the comic yourself, should you choose to read it. But I just thought it was interesting that they put this dynamic there. But getting back to the conflict, what I love about this is that one of the villains is also the reason why all this is going on, a guy by the name of Stickman, who is considered to be one of the more premier supervillains in this universe. And there's some connection between Frankie and this supervillain that's not exactly spelled out, but there's definitely some hints there that there's more to the story than what we're told. And while Frankie is just trying to mind her own business and keep her head down, she keeps seeing the supervillains around her get hurt, and they're all being brutalized by the heroes for crimes they didn't commit. And there's also even hints at the fact that the superheroes might be more responsible for this than the villains were. And while everything in Frankie's life is just falling down around her, she finally just decides to do the one thing that she told herself she would never do again, and that's using her powers. She doesn't want to use her powers anymore. She just wants to be a normal person. But now she's thrown in this situation where if she isn't allowed to live her life as a normal person and make up for the things that she did in the past, she's now chosen to use her powers, but this time, instead of using them to do evil, she's going to use them to do good, putting together a team of other villains, and they're planning to do the job of superheroes the way only supervillains can do. And I love it. I think this is a fantastic comic. This is so great. It is such a fun story that is also a very serious story. Like, there's definitely some moments of levity in this comic. They're definitely there, make no mistake. But there's also some very serious moments in this comic. There's also some moments of dread. There's also a lot of really, I would dare say, smart commentary here on the superhero world, how certain superheroes, they don't ever come to the bad neighborhoods. They only stay in the good neighborhoods. They protect the entire universe, but don't worry about the world that's beneath their feet. There's a lot of, I would dare say, biting commentary on the Marvel and DC Comics universe, both of them, superhero comics in general. But there's also some really fun stuff in here that actually uplifts the superhero genre. It's one of those situations where I feel like, yeah, these guys actually get it. While I never think that a black or brown comic book character or any fictitious character should ever be depicted as a former criminal, I don't ever think that's the first place your mind should go when you're trying to think up a new black and brown, character to exist in any kind of popular media. I do find that this is actually handled incredibly well because it's not exactly her fault. There's a deeper story to tell here, and the hooks that they throw out there, I think, are tantalizing enough that make me want to hang around to see what happens to Frankie, or rather, Playtime, next. But anyways, that's everything I wanted to talk about with this comic. I highly recommend it. If you have not checked out Minor Threats, this is a great offering from Dark Horse Comics. It's not something that I even thought I would be interested in reading. When I saw this comic, I was like, I don't know about this one. But I checked it out just on a whim. It was on a lark. And then I read it and I was like, oh wow, this is actually one of the better comics I've read in quite some time. This is actually a really solid superhero commentary comic that happens to star a person of color. It's handled all, I think, pretty well. If you want to know about more obscure comic book superheroes, check out this video up here where I talk about Image Comics Stealth. And if you want to know more about one of the toughest black female superhero characters that I think I've ever read about, check out this video down here to learn everything about Martha Washington. But anyways, let me know what you thought about Minor Threats. Have you checked it out yourself? Is something on your radar? Are you going to check it out? Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.